It's the end of March, which means it's time for another monthly reading wrap-up. This was a bizarre month for reading because it could literally be summed up as either girls having mental breakdowns or questioning the validity of religion. Quite a weird mix, but also, wow, the duality of my reading taste, who is she? So in this video, I'm going to be telling you about the 6 books I read in the month of March, what I gave them out of 5 stars, and what I liked and disliked about them. I'm Katerina, by the way, so as always, welcome to the channel. And alrighty, let's get into it. Also, just apologies in advance for the lighting in this video. The weather changes its mind every 5 minutes, so if you see the sun one second and it's gone the next, you know why. The very first book I read in the month of March was All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. This book follows a Muslim Pakistani American family living in California, and it alternates between 3 different people's perspectives: a mother, her son, and the son's best friend. And it mostly follows the son and his best friend's lives, who are seniors in high school. And it explores their struggles in establishing themselves and finding their identity in a town that ultimately rejects them. And they also attempt to leave the trauma of their past behind. This book is about grief, failure, love, rage, and forgiveness. And I gave this book 4 stars. I really like this book because even though it is a young adult novel, it explores some incredibly dark topics, including illness and grief, which the author writes in such a raw but beautiful way. And I found this book really monumental in shedding light on the reality of when immigrants face ill health, and especially the consequences and trauma that come from that, because it showcases how not all immigrants have the luxury of basic necessities like healthcare, because sometimes they have to deal with external pressures and burdens, which means that they don't have the time to think about their health, simply because they're just not a resident from that country. Plus, this book very accurately explores female rage in the context of eldest daughter in an immigrant household, which again is something so rarely explored, but something so many girls, including myself, can really relate to. There wasn't anything glaring that I disliked about the book, so the next thing I'm about to say is perhaps a bit nitpicky, but there's a lot of problematic traits with the characters, such as alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, but I feel as though the root reasons for these were not really explored, which could make some people think, oh, they're just like that. And I worry it may lead to negative stereotyping of people being like, oh, they're just like that because it's their culture, rather than going into the reasons of like, no, these traits could affect everyone and these are the reasons why. I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking too much into it, but that was my personal insight on it. But aside from that, I really like this book and I would really recommend anyone to read it. I also talk about this book more in my Muslim identity video, which I'll link in the description below. The second book I read this month was The Curious Case of Benjamin Button by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is a witty and fantastical novella that follows the life of a man born as a withered senior, and he mysteriously ages backwards. And as he grows younger, he embraces life with the wisdom and knowledge acquired. He runs a business, goes to war, falls in love, has kids, goes to college, until one day his mind begins to slowly devolve and he loses his memories until he ends up passing away as a baby. And like the previous book, I rated this 4 stars. Growing up, I was in love with the film. It was just such an absurd, mysterious, and melancholic tale that I was just obsessed with. And I mentioned this already in my previous RIP Jesus, you would have absolutely loved these books video. But finding out the film was based on a book from finding this in a charity shop honestly blew my mind. And the fact it's written by the same author as The Great Gatsby, like what on earth? But anyway, this short 50-page story is a clever satire on aging and American culture. And despite it being so short, it had some really witty and insightful remarks that I genuinely wish were expanded with more social commentary. But maybe the fact it's so short adds to the charm because it's for you to kind of figure out the meaning yourself. But I suppose the moral of the story is that age is just a number, and we shouldn't use that to limit ourselves in living to the fullest. And it also had a lot of bits in the novel that just really made me laugh. Like when he's born, he's already complaining that he wants a rocking chair and a walking stick. And then when he's a toddler, his dad catches him trying to light up a Cuban cigar in his room. And it just has funny, ironic parallels like that with children. My only bugbear with this book, which is why I didn't rate it 5 stars, is the way he treated his wife. Like, he knows already he's aging backwards, and when he meets her, he's an older man, but he insists on marrying her. Yet, as time passes and he grows younger and she grows older, he then one day realizes, oh, I don't actually love you that much anymore, because she's literally aging and he's not. Like, he literally decides at one point to go to war just so he doesn't have to hang out with her. Benjamin, what the hell? But apart from that section, which was literally only a page long, the rest of the book was really fantastic, and I would actually recommend it to read, just bar from that bad take on women. The next book I read last month was Lapnova by Ottessa Moshfegh. This novel follows a very weird medieval town that's plagued by tragedy and misfortune, and the people there are extremely religious. They literally look to God for everything. And the book follows several different characters, including a poor orphan shepherd, a supernatural wet nurse/witch, and a very corrupt lord. And after several consecutive misfortunes, the town basically realised that greed and corruption are the root for all their suffering. And I gave this book 3.5 stars. This book is honestly revolting, yet utterly captivating. And to be honest, nothing describes an Ottessa Moshfegh book quite like that. So fair play to our queen for staying true to herself. If you can't tell, I'm an Ottessa Moshfegh girly through and through. The author actually wrote this book during the pandemic, and I think once you realise this, the messaging in the book starts to make a lot more sense, as the tale is such a clever allegory for the medieval and modern world, of those that have too much and those that have too little. In our story, we have a manipulated lord who, to be honest, is a bit of an idiot, and he enjoys an abundance of luxury and privileges because he's surrounded by corrupt religious figures, such as a priest who lives with him, legitimizing this corruption whilst others suffer. For example, Lapnovians are strict veggies, yet the wealthy gorge on meat, and whilst there's a drought and loads of people die, the Lord has all this water supply from snowmelt that he just uses for recreational use. And the pandemic allegory is so obvious here. We saw politicians and people with wealth enjoy luxuries and privileges that the majority of people did not get to have purely because of status, which overall I thought was cleverly written in this way. That being said, I love this author for being able to write some really weird and gross stuff. However, there were times in the book where it almost felt unnecessary and I didn't really see how it added to the plot apart from creating shock value. Like, we had incest, cannibalism, and implied paedophilia all in one book. We won't even talk about the grape or breastfeeding scene. They still haunt my nightmares. If you like the author's work, I would still recommend you to read it, but if you haven't read any of her work before, I wouldn't start with this. I'd probably start with My Year of Rest and Relaxation or Eileen. The fourth book I read this month was Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. This novel is set between the 1920s and 40s, and it follows the life of a young man who goes to Oxford University and becomes obsessed with his friend. His friend then invites him to his house, which is basically a mansion, and there he meets his incredibly wealthy, aristocratic Catholic family, which he then goes on to have various relationships and romances with. And I gave this book, like the last one, 3.5 stars. If this plot sounds familiar to you, you're not going crazy. This is actually one of the books that inspired this film Saltburn, but the film is a way more extremely eccentric modern version of the book. Like, don't worry, there's no bathtub period or graveyard scene in the novel. And also, unlike the film, the book actually very heavily centers around Catholicism, and this was honestly something very interesting to read about, because it explores the loyalty and almost ingrained guilt that the family has to their religion. And throughout the novel, all the family members commit some quite big sins, to the eyes of God anyway, but they all undergo some conversion in one way or the other that brings them back to their religion, to the point where even the main character, who was initially agnostic, ends up converting. I also talk about this novel more in my RIP Jesus video, but religion aside, this book also has some incredible social commentary on historic wealth and class in England, and I honestly found this aspect the most interesting of the book. And you realise how this elite class basically constructs their world in a way to keep all the other people out. Common folk, if you will. You can literally argue that rich people were the original gatekeepers. And one example that the book uses is how language itself can be used to gatekeep poorer people. Such as in the book, they literally have this reference to a place called Pont Street. And in the book, they say, they collected phrases that damned their user and among themselves, and often, disconcertingly, in public, talked a language made up for them. It was Pont Street to wear a signet ring and give chocolates at the theatre. It was Pont Street to dance and say, can I forage you? Which is interesting to show how the bare bones of the English language is used to keep the less wealthy people out of these circles. The only thing I disliked about the book was that it was really hard to get into. It literally took me about 2 weeks to finish just because the language is quite archaic and complex. It's a bit like poetry where you have to really read it slow and almost twice in order to really comprehend the true meaning of what they're saying. But when you do, the language is so gorgeous and it is worth it. So I actually do know that this isn't really a valid reason to dislike the book, because it's my own incompetency from TikTok brain rot that leads me to not understand. But I think if you go into the book knowing it's going to be a little bit more difficult to read, then I think you end up appreciating it more because you purposely go slower. The fifth book I read this month was Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. This book follows a young woman who's working at a Silicon Valley startup, and she essentially finds herself trapped in a toxic corporate nightmare, and she's having to deal with working long hours around the clock, horrible bosses, and even illegal projects. And when she initially joined, she was optimistic, thinking that she finally made it, but in the novel it explores the dark reality of living in a city where obscene wealth lives alongside poverty. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. Some books weirdly find you at the right time in life, and this was very much the case for me, because before I picked up this book I was very much having an existential crisis about late-stage capitalism and work culture, you know, as you do. And then I read this book, and then I spiraled into an even bigger existential crisis, so that was fun. But at the same time, I was really glad I picked up this book because it validated my feelings and anxieties, and it felt comforting knowing other people were also going through the same thing, as bleak as that sounds. But despite the book sounding depressing, it's also very sharp and captivating, and I genuinely finished the book in about 2 days because I was so stressed out wanting to know what happened next. But it was also just very painfully relatable. As a corporate girly, it hit a little too close to home, because it does quite accurately show the hellscape that is living as a 20-year-old something in a big city working a hard job, whilst also trying to balance other stuff in life, such as saving for your future, renting, having a love life, seeing friends, family, all that fun stuff. Whilst I really loved the book, I didn't give it 5 stars just because at some points the main character slightly annoyed me. Like, yes, working and living in this day and age can be incredibly tough, but I feel like as though she saw the world in such a definitive way, and it felt quite simplistic for her just to be like, everything sucks, there's no point of living, which I understand that some people do actually feel that way, but it kind of felt like her character was just really passive and she just allowed all these things to happen to her without really ever standing her ground. And if there's anything that I've personally learned from corporate culture is that you do need to communicate your boundaries and your feelings, and if that doesn't work, then leave. And she did neither. But apart from that, this is still an incredible book, and I think if you relate to anything that I've just mentioned, then you should definitely pick it up and read. And the very final book I read in the month of March was Notes on Heartbreak by Annie Lord. This is an autobiographical memoir of a young woman's relationship and breakup with her ex-boyfriend. It recounts when she first met him, the ups and downs of their relationship, and the aftermath of them parting ways. And alongside this, she also explores being newly single, disastrous rebounds, getting ghosted, etc, etc. And I gave this book 2.5 stars. Loads of people raved about this book, but I liked it, but I didn't love it. I had high hopes when I picked it up, honestly. And I won't lie, I was particularly freaked out about how similar the author's situation was to my own. Like, we're both from Yorkshire, we both went to Newcastle Uni, we both met our boyfriends there, and we both broke up with them 5 years later. Like, is Annie Lord just an alternative version of me from another reality? Who knows? Anyway, I did honestly quite rate how accurately she describes breakups and how horrendous and just all-consuming they can be, especially where we live in a world where you're just kind of expected to carry on as usual after a breakup, and it's not really given the same amount of care as other things are, which is incredibly validating and comforting if you're going through a breakup. However, whilst this book did have a really strong premise, and I really did like the first half of the book, in the second half I just got so bored because it just felt really repetitive and whiny. Like, towards the end of the book, I actually just found her annoying and not all that relatable. Like, yes, breakups are awful and they can be really tough to go through, but they're not the bane of your entire existence. And I was really hoping for some interesting plot developments or a character arc, but it just kind of felt quite flat. Or similar to Dolly Alderton's Everything I Know About Love, I was hoping that there was going to be some interesting life lessons along with the plot. But everything this author was saying was just very simplistic and obvious. Like, she just said, don't center your life around men. And it's like, yeah, obviously. I don't know, maybe this book is more for younger audiences who haven't been through relationships yet, so this is very much like a foundational thing for them, but it wasn't groundbreaking for me by any means. Plus, all like the lessons she does list in the books literally comes from other books where she explains where they're from, so it's just like, you may as well just read the other books that she lists. Overall, it was okay. Like, the first half was good in describing how breakups can be quite painful, and I also did quite rate the Yorkshire and Geordie references, but I just wasn't obsessed with the book. And there you have it. Those are all the books I've read in the month of March. Like I said, it's pretty much either girls having mental breakdowns or questioning the validity of religion, which apparently both seem to be my cup of tea. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please drop a like down below. It really helps out my channel. And let me know in the comments what books you read in the month of March. Any about girls having mental breakdowns or anything about religion? If you're new here, please subscribe. I make new videos every Tuesday and it'd be nice to see you there. Please feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post a lot more personal stuff on there, but I also post books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see there and then what I've read rather than waiting for the end of the month for a video like this. But anyway, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!